Thank you all for joining. I know you're all signing on and connecting to audio right now. But we are going to get started. We have a really exciting event for you tonight. So I'm Sarah Chapman, and I'm the Executive Director of Media Burn. And Media Burn is an archive based in Chicago. We're a nonprofit that collects, preserves, and distributes documentary and experimental media produced by artists, activists, and community groups. Our mission is to create positive social change by amplifying underheard voices, both in contemporary dialogue and the historical record. Before we get any further, I want to let you know that captions are available. And the way you turn them on is by going to the bottom of your screen. There's a little button, 3 dots, that says more. And if you click that, a little thing pops up that says captions. And if you enable that, you will be able to have some live captions going for you. This event is also being recorded. So if you happen to miss a little bit, have to leave early, or just love it so much you want to share it with your friends, that recording will be available after the event. We'll send it out to everyone who is registered. So please keep an eye out for that. Yes, so this event is part of an ongoing free series called Virtual Talks with Video Activists, which creates conversations surrounding media production. If you enjoy this event, our next one is going to be in 2 weeks on September 28th, and we're going to take a deep dive into the 1970s guerrilla television movement with archivists who worked to preserve it in partnership with the Visual Studies Workshop. So tonight we are pleased to be presenting a screening and discussion of the not yet released documentary film, The Voice That Rocked America, The Dick Biondi Story. So you will be among a select group of people who've gotten to preview it before it is officially released, which is really exciting. And we're going to give you some information at the towards the end about upcoming screenings if you want to watch the whole thing or you want to enjoy it in person with a crowd. So we're going to start the film just shortly. It's going to be about 28 minutes. It's about half of the film. And then after the screening, we'll be joined by the film's director, Pamela Pulice, and longtime journalist Robert Feeder, who you'll see in the film. Both of them have a deep appreciation for the life and work of Dick Biondi, and we are thrilled to have them take part in this discussion. We would love for you to take part in the discussion too. But while we're screening the film, please make sure to stay muted. We want everyone to be able to hear. We want the recording to be clear. So if your microphone isn't muted right now, go ahead and mute it, and keep it muted during the duration of the screening. Then once it's time for the conversation, well, you can just start typing questions in the chat anytime during the screening, and we'll get to them afterwards. You can, type questions in the chat anytime. During the discussion portion, you can also there's a Zoom function to raise your hand. You can raise your hand and we'll call on you if you want to talk out loud. We love that too. So don't be shy. And with that, I think we're going to roll the film.
In 1961, the first wave of baby boomers were coming of age. Radio was king, and America's #1 disc jockey was Dick Biondi.
This is the Wild-Eyed Australian Dick Biondi.
Dick Biondi is a unique force of nature.
Roses are red, violets are blue. If I don't read a commercial, the boss says I'm through.
Who is that? Is he on something?
Twisting down the dial and going from the low numbers to the high, and you passed that voice of his, you had to go back. We had never heard anything like it.
The village idiot, the supersonic spaghetti slooper, the nut.
He was the original radio rock star who could fill huge gymnasiums and ballrooms and auditoriums, who could be airlifted in by helicopter, who would amass so many people they would tear his clothes off as if he were the rock star.
He is the real deal. He is certainly one of the great representations of what radio was all about.
He introduced listeners to Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly, Jerry Lee Lewis, the greats.
Dick Biondi was the first disc jockey to play a Beatles song. Dick was playing them 9 months before they went on Sullivan.
He's helped so many people's careers, especially here in Chicago.
In 1963, we recorded Surfer Girl, and then Mike said, why don't we take it to Dick Biondi? They played it and people called in on the phone and said, we love that record.
He was always a champion of R&B music. He played music by black artists that not a lot of people were playing.
He was one of the first guys to play Little Richard's records. I went up to Richard and I says, Richard, remember Dick Biondi? He said, of course I do. If it wasn't for Dick Biondi, there would be no Little Richard.
Everything that was going on in your world was filtered through your favorite radio station, your favorite DJ, and that, more than anyone else, was Dick Biondi.
There was nobody like Biondi. We listened every single night. We never missed his show. You know, Dick became the voice in our heads. Dick Biondi was the voice in our cars, the voice under our pillows, and the voice that rocked America.
You are, stick around, we'll have some fun.
Ask anyone who grew up in Chicago in the early 60s, and they probably have a story about the wild-eyed Australian Dick Biondi, including me, the former president of the West Suburban Dick Biondi fan club. And even now, Biondi holds a special place in so many of our hearts. But the voice that thrilled our generation was almost silenced before he ever said a word.
I was born in Endicott, New York. When I was born, the umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck and it was choking and cutting off my air. So they called the priest to come up and baptize me at the hospital. And then a month and so later, they baptized me in the church. So I've been baptized twice. It's interesting to think that that's where my voice and my whole career came from. I lived in what we call the North Side. They called it the Knob. And it was 99% Italian. They called me the Scorch because I was always talking, always putting my nose in people's business. They always told me, oh, shut up. I was probably the last guy they'd pick to be on their team because they didn't want to hear me blabbing all the time. One day, my mother was cooking at the stove in the cellar. And I don't know what happened, but I must have got on her nerves. And she swung around, she had a pot in her hand and hit me on the head with the pot. And it dented the bottom of the pot, literally. And she didn't say another word. After that, she hung that pot on the wall and never used it again.
That would not be the last time Dick's mouth got him into trouble. But he also found that his gift for gab could bring opportunity. Like when, at the age of 8, he visited a radio station in Auburn, New York.
I would stand and watch this guy, Bob Morgan, and he waved me in. And when I said, can you read? And I said, yeah. He said, here. And then he gave me a commercial for Brotan's women's clothing. And I didn't even know I was on the air, but when I got home, they heard me. That's when I got the bug. I would go up in the attic of my house, and I'd sit at a little table. I made a little wooden microphone. And I would sit there and make them believe I was on the air. And people would be walking by, and my father and mother would be in the porch, and there's that crazy guy. And, you know, but I was doing it. In my dreams, in my thoughts, during high school and work, I said, I wish someday that I could be on the radio and have every kid in the country listening to me.
As a little boy, that's what he wanted to do. His subconscious mind took a picture of that and said, now I know where you want me to go.
After high school, Dick took a job at WCBA in Corning, New York. But after 3 months, he was fired for the first, but certainly not the last time in his career. Dick refused to be discouraged and continued to dream of a life on the air. But his next radio gig would take him a world away from New York.
I got an offer of a job in Alexandria, Louisiana, and I packed everything, and my father, mother, my sister, and my aunt took me to the bus station. So I said goodbye to them. He walked me to the bus door. And just as I started to climb the steps, he took my arm and he said, "Go chase your dream." And that's what I've been doing ever since. Got off the bus and I looked and there was a sign on a water fountain for colored only. And that was all around. I didn't understand it. I finally did, but it wasn't something that was the most pleasant thing in the world to deal with.
I remember one show I did in the South, and because the blacks had to be in the back, I sung to the wall on the side. I didn't care if they didn't like it, because I didn't like what was happening. And I had to make a stand some kind of way.
In Alexandria, Dick made his own statement over the airwaves.
We had a show on called Jam and Jive. Monday through Friday, we would be playing all what they called race or sepia music back then. It was just a great show, and it included people like Fats Domino before he became very famous, Joe Liggins and the Honey Drippers and Ruth Brown, and I even attended a couple of the dances at the Greystone Grill, which is on Lower 3rd Street back then. And I remember going there and being the only Caucasian in the building. The people were really, really nice. And I always remember that they probably gave me more education about people and the way things were than if I had gone to college. I did run into a couple of times when the Ku Klux Klan people, they did call me a damn Yankee, and they said, "How can you play that kind of music?"
But most in town gave Biondi a warm welcome, including a young lady named Hazel.
You met your first wife down in Louisiana, didn't you?
Yes, I met her in a Walgreens drugstore. She used to listen, and she called up, and we kept talking, and one day she said, "Let's have coffee," and I did. And one thing led to another, and we got married. It was a marriage that lasted over 20 years.
From Alexandria, Dick made his way to WSBA in York, Pennsylvania, and then soon after to WHOT in Youngstown, Ohio, where his career took a major leap forward.
Youngstown was just putting a station on the air, and it was going to be all music, rock and roll. That's where it all started. Then the record company started realizing that when I was playing their songs the next morning, if I played it the first time, people were running to the thing and buying it.
He was the hottest DJ in Youngstown, Ohio, and he had so many inventive ideas.
And then I started doing record hops. That's the first place, and I loved it. We had Idora Park, which is like a Great America theme park, and then there was a place called the Elms Ballroom, and every Friday night, I'd go out there and play rock and roll, and it was great. I had Jerry Lee Lewis come to my dances, Fats Domino, Bobby Darin, Paul Anka.
So I had the opportunity to go to his record hops, and of course that started the ball rolling and snowballing for me, and he was very instrumental.
First of all, he's Italian. I'm Italian, Avalon's Italian, Fabian's Italian, Paul Anka, we're not quite sure about. But no, Dick is just a warm-hearted guy.
I wanted to get Elvis, and I still have the telegram from Colonel Parker, because I wanted him to come and do a hop. Colonel Parker sent me, "We are too booked and we can't make it."
Did you finally get to meet Elvis?
Yeah, I met Elvis the very first time he came north. I got the RCA people to take me backstage. He was just as delightful as could be. I'll never forget him. I said hello, we talked, and I said, "Would you mind signing my shirt?" And he said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I'm going to have a record hop Friday night, and I'm going to jump off the stage, and whoever gets it will have your autograph." And he laughed. He said, "You're crazy."
Elvis signed the shirt, and then he did the leap into the crowd. That's crazy.
It seemed to me 9 million girls came at me, but nobody got his autograph. They ripped that shirt to shreds. It was completely gone. And an hour later, I was in the emergency room at the hospital because my back was bleeding like somebody with those nails. But it was great. Elvis was just a delight and a wonderful, wonderful guy.
His success in Youngstown led Dick to take a job at WKBW in Buffalo, New York, where he made an art out of getting himself in trouble.
Hello everybody, Dick Biondi with you on the big KB, going to be with you until midnight over 17 states in the Eastern Seaboard and everybody up there in Canada.
He was pretty outrageous in Buffalo. And in fact, one of the stunts he pulled there, I believe, was jokingly saying that there'd be no school tomorrow, and the absentee rate was unbelievable.
Dick is the original son of anarchy. One of the first things he does is make some sort of anti-management comment. And he pounds it. And the boss isn't going to let me do this, or the boss is this, or the boss is that.
Hey, how about that, boss of mine? It bugs me, man. First thing I get here, you talk too much.
One of the managers had just gotten married, so his wife was having some party at home. His new wife was having some party, and he got kicked out. So he was already in a bad mood.
So he pulls into the radio station, opens the door, and says, you know, you're a terrible disc jockey. You don't do anything right. You talk too much, blah, blah, blah. Wow. He said, now I'm going down to the Buffalo Theater to see a show, and I want to hear you become better. Cynical. So my record ended, I opened the mic and I said,
Does anybody on Main Street, that ding-dong just left here and he's going to see a movie at the Shea Buffalo. He's driving a great Impala, it's a convertible. And if you see it, throw rocks at him, it'll serve him right.
And wouldn't you know, some kid threw a stone the size of an orange right through the windshield.
That's the power of radio and the power of his personality.
The next morning I got fired. 2 weeks later, I got a telegram from Sam Holman saying, how would you like to work in Chicago?
Dick's next station, WLS in Chicago, was a powerhouse that was changing how radio connected to its listeners.
Radio had been around since the 1920s, but by the 1950s it was in big trouble. The network model had been broken by the arrival of television. The medium had to reinvent itself, and this was happening at a time of post-war prosperity and the baby boom and the advent of the transistor radio.
Transistor radio.
Everybody had a transistor radio. It hung from the handlebars of our bicycles. We carried it with us in our bucket purses.
So you suddenly no longer had big radios that had tubes in them. You had these small things.
In Chicago, there were disc jockeys playing music on the radio, playing Patty Page, How Much Is That Doggy in the Window, or Pat Boone, that kind of vanilla, middle-of-the-road pop standards. Nothing was geared to the youth, adolescent, teenage demographic until May 2nd, 1960 in Chicago, when the new sound debuted on WLS.
WLS in Chicago, 1960.
WLS transformed itself from the Prairie Farmer station to Chicago's premier top 40 rock and roll radio outlet.
For 36 years, WLS, the Prairie Farmer, had been the lifeblood of the farm community. On May 2nd, 1960, the station made the overnight switch from country to top 40.
You're tuned to the ugliest disc jockey in radio.
I mean, it jumps out of the speakers, there's no mistaking it, and you go back. What was that?
That was the turning point for, certainly for Chicago radio and for radio across the country.
I was so excited I couldn't believe it. 50,000 watts. During the 3 years I was there, I heard from every state except Alaska and Hawaii. Sam Holman was the program director. The first meeting, he said, I want you guys to go into the studio, have fun, just don't lose the license. And that was radio. And it was. We went crazy.
It's a good time for the good sound of music with Dick Biondi.
Hey, on the Dick Biondi Show, let's do the homework. Let's smile on a beautiful Tuesday.
It's 39 degrees and the winds are west at 12 miles an hour.
Suddenly, we had our own radio station. We had our own disc jockeys. They were not talking to mom and dad. They were for us, for our whole generation of teenagers. They were speaking our language, and we loved it.
If you were a young person in the early 60s living in Chicago, you listened to Dick Biondi at night, period. Because that's what all your friends were talking about the next day.
It was like, come on and join me and get as crazy as I am.
This guy was talking to you. That was the difference with Biondi. He spoke to you.
I want to say hi to Chubbs, Hot Lips, Bubble Nose, and Mr. Clean. And congratulations to Adie and Sherman on their 6-month anniversary. All right.
I think that's the connection that everybody got from him. You would tune in the radio and sit there and listen to him talk to you.
From the time I discovered this man, Dick Biondi, on the radio, I felt like I was a part of a secret society.
1960 was the first day I heard this loudmouth, squeaky Italian screaming out of my transistor radio.
Hello there. This is the world's ugliest disc jockey, Dick Biondi, and we're here until midnight. We got a lot of fun, and hello to all the wonderful people out there.
Dick was different, and so was I. After moving from Australia with my family, I was a shy girl with a thick Australian accent, trying to adjust to life in suburban Chicago. And I immediately connected with Biondi and his offbeat personality. That connection would ultimately change my life. I'll never forget the day I met Dick Biondi. I heard on the radio on WLS, Dick Biondi's over at the local shopping center, so I begged my dad to drive us. I thought to myself, wow, I'm finally getting to meet the wild Italian. And when we arrived, I looked up and there was Dick Biondi in a helicopter. The kids were going crazy, especially me. Later, when we got a chance to talk to Dick, Dick was just as warm and sweet as he could be. And I said to myself, right then, I am going to start a fan club for Dick Biondi. My fan club was a grassroots affair. I would talk about it at school, and soon the kids would come to see me about getting their own Dick Biondi membership cards.
I've lost my marriage license, my high school diplomas, my grade school diplomas, a million other documents, but I still have my official Dick Biondi club card.
He was a big star, and he treated everybody like they were his best friend, even a 16-year-old kid in high school. He took the time to look me in the eye and give me encouragement. You know, he said, you can do anything you want. That's great. You know, those things stick in your mind. This is the way you treat people. This is the way that I want to act.
And then I started writing a newsletter for my fan club. It was the first time I ever shared my writing. I even gave Dick a copy. He smiled, and it was a big deal. It really was, for me personally.
Dick Biondi made kids feel like they mattered.
Hello there, the Dick Biondi Show. Let's smile, let's be happy. Come on, everybody, it's a beautiful night in Chicago, and I want to ask you a question there, friends and neighbors there. If you've been to your favorite store and you haven't been able to find Wilson's Biff, B as in baseball, I have.
Those days they broadcast in suits and ties that you were a grown-up. But kids knew he was one of theirs. He was with them. And because they had already forged this special relationship with him, they wanted to let him know how much he meant to them.
When we heard Dick recorded a new album, we couldn't wait to get our hands on it. And when we did, we were shocked. See this sweater? My girlfriend Joan, my sister Bev, and I bought that sweater for Dick.
He had the sweater on the cover of the album. I was so excited.
Look at those colors. I mean, it was loud and crazy, just like he is. And so we chipped in our allowances and we bought it, and he loved it.
This album is dedicated 100% to you, the teenagers of America, the most vibrant, most wonderful, and honest people we have ever had the pleasure of knowing or meeting.
And kids trusted him. And they knew if he liked something, if he was pushing a band, you knew it was worth your attention. And he was always right.
He had great ears. He was responsible for a lot of big hits.
A lot of big hits that he started playing before anybody played caught on throughout the country and sometimes internationally.
First time a guy played Tony Orlando was a man named Dick Biondi. And the song was called Halfway to Paradise. And who was it written by? A young little songwriter by the name of Carole King and Jerry Goff and her husband. Anybody that started in that era, you had to have Dick Biondi in your corner. You really didn't have a hit record unless WLS played that record.
Dick was the right guy at the right time in the right time slot. And what he did on WLS was truly phenomenal.
Biondi was known for introducing artists to American audiences, as he did with a quartet from Liverpool, England.
Ewart Abner was the national promotion man for VJ Records here in Chicago. And he's the guy who in February of '63 came to the station and gave me a copy of a group called the Beatles.
Biondi was the first to play a Beatles song on the radio in the United States, and it was in 1963.
50 weeks before the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan's show.
And everybody turned thumbs down, including myself. I said, no, I just think there's better American groups that we ought to be featuring than these guys that need a haircut.
And nobody really cared. I think Dick liked it and played it, and it just didn't do anything.
Kids were not ready for that. The British invasion wasn't here.
You know, but he kept pushing, and he played it and played it. And finally, a few weeks later, around 2nd or 3rd of March, it appeared at number 40 on the WLS Silver Dollar Survey. Next week, it hopped up to number 35, and then it disappeared.
While America wasn't quite ready for the British invasion, in Chicago, Biondi led a one-man Italian invasion with a hit single of his own.
For me, the craziest thing that Biondi ever did, and that is to start singing on top of a pizza.
On top of a pizza.
Probably the worst singing you've ever heard in your life.
He had that voice, then people would say it was like nails on a chalkboard.
It ended up selling 11,000 copies.
To get one, you had to send me 50 cents and 6 Pepsi-Cola bottle caps.
When I would stop in Chicago, this is the God's truth, you used to have to stop in Chicago to refuel your flight to go to LA. Who do you think would be at the airport meeting me with a piece of pizza? Dick Biondi.
You always had pizza with Dick.
In 1961 and 62, the Gavin Top 40 Disc Jockey Award went to Dick Biondi.
I mean, Dick had something like 56% of the audience back in the day at WLS in the early 60s.
Those kind of rating numbers don't happen anymore. That was a unique deal.
You were number one.
Yeah.
How did it feel to be number one disc jockey?
Being number one wasn't the thing, it was just everybody was listening. I guess, yeah, I loved it.
The fact that it was only 3 years is really remarkable because it left such an impression on an entire generation, not just in Chicago, but all across the Midwest and the country, that it lived on years and years after that.
A snake for a 2-year-old? What kind of snake are you going to get her? Kimosabi. Only one kind of snake to get for baby. That be rattler.
He really wasn't doing anything dangerous or edgy. But at the time, it seemed like he was tapping into the youthful rebellion of the era, being a little bit edgy, a little bit rebellious. So what's he gonna say tonight?
Happy birthday, Leonard Goldenson, you think chairman of ABC.
What's he gonna say that's gonna get him in trouble?
To all the jerky bosses.
Is this the night he's gonna go too far and get fired?
Stingy cheapskates wouldn't even give us coffee and cake. They're so tight they squeak.
To the horror of us listeners, one night in 1963, Biondi's disagreements with management reached a boiling point. Legend has it that Biondi told an off-color joke on the air, but what really happened is even crazier.
1963, Biondi is on the air and the sales manager comes in and says, we need to add a few more commercials to your show.
And that didn't sit well with Dick.
And when I walked in to tape my Sunday night show, he was waiting for me, and he starts yelling at me again. And I said, would you mind just leaving me alone? He said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to come in there and whoop your ass.
The two ended up on the floor in a fist fight.
He leveled him. And so they let him go. What a surprise.
Gene said, Dick, go home and cool off. And Dick said, if I go home, I'm not coming back.
He just left.
He loved his audience, and he loved his show, and he loved to serve them. And that was what, I mean, isn't that great that was what the issue that he took the stand on? It was about, this isn't right for my listeners. Who does that?
And said, no, this is the way it should be. And if you don't like it, then I have to go someplace else. And that's what's great about him. That's why I love him.
Every single day.
We were all brokenhearted when Dick left. He was so much a part of our lives, and suddenly he was gone. It would be 20 years before our paths would cross again, and by then, our lives had changed drastically.
Hello, everyone. We're back. We're going to start the conversation. I'm going to bring Pam and Robert on. And there we go. Looking forward to this great conversation.
Thanks, Sarah. It's great to be with you. Hello, Pam.
Hello, Robert. Hello,
In
Sarah.
watching your wonderful film again, I was really struck this time by how important the very few years that Dick Biondi spent in Louisiana turned out to be. This was 1950. He's this early 20s kid from upstate New York who finds himself in the heart of the Jim Crow South of the United States in Louisiana. And his exposure to Black artists and to race music at that time would inform his whole understanding of this musical revolution that was about to take over the country. And his exposure to that and that whole world, which he otherwise would not have known, informed his knowledge and his love of the music that he was later able to share with the rest of the country, with all of us. That's a pretty remarkable piece of his whole story. You have been working on this film for almost 10 years now. Were there things you discovered in the course of it that surprised you, that changed your feeling about anything about his career?
I learned a lot doing the research on this. I mean, there were certain things I knew, but yeah, that part of his life, you know, he was fresh out of high school when he went down south. I mean, he got one little job in between and he was fired right away after a few months. And then he went down south. And he was down there for a couple of years, and boy, he cut his teeth on radio down there, and he got to work with Fats Domino and all those great artists before they were famous and before rock and roll was even a word. You know, in fact, they didn't even have, it wasn't even called rhythm and blues at that time. It was called race or sepia music. Mm-hmm. He was so far ahead of the curve. It was unbelievable. And he absolutely fell in love with the people and the music. And that stayed with him his whole life. He had a great respect for Black artists.
And it didn't it give him a more complete understanding of the whole culture and the whole world of rock and roll that was so important in his understanding and in his promoting artists that he knew were talented and deserved to be listened to, right?
It was like a foundation for him, for his entire music, you know, this library of incredible music that he had in his head. He knew all the artists. He knew them personally. They loved him because he loved them, you know, and that's just how it's been through all of his career. But yeah, you're right, Robert. This was integral to his choice of music and his knowledge of music. Yes.
And I think the other big takeaway overall is that it was the 3 years in Chicago the first time at WLS from 1960 to 1963 that really defined him as a broadcasting icon and endeared him to a generation of listeners. And I think it was perfect timing, because Dick came to personify the buoyant optimism of that time, of the Kennedy era. This was, the Pepsi generation was just coming into its own. And we talked about it in the film, and transistor radios and post-war affluence and the baby boom and all that. But everything came together, and he was the perfect guy at the perfect time in the perfect medium. And it made an indelible impression on thousands, if not millions, of listeners. He was at the epicenter of the youth culture of that time. And that was when he made his impression on you, right?
Absolutely.
But speak to his influence, though, because you do have a personal debt to him. You dropped out of high school your junior year at Willowbrook High School. Why is that relevant to Dick Biondi?
Because Dick was such a role model, and and for all teenagers, he would sometimes get serious on the radio when it was important. He always stood up for teenagers. And you remember what teenagers were like back in those days. Parents were like, the kids were going to the dogs with rock and roll, that devil music, and Dick was just always there to support us. He wrote about us. He had columns about teenagers, and he would always stick up for us kids. He loved us, we knew it, we felt it. And he was our friend. He was really our friend. And I think that's why everybody in Chicago gravitated to Dick, and we felt his love. We really did. And we gave it right back to him.
But you also said he was a positive influence on you.
Very positive. And as you said, when I quit school, when I was a junior in high school, I was listening to the radio one day. This is later in the film for those who haven't seen it. And I heard Dick talking seriously about, if you quit school, don't be dumb, go back, finish up, and I did. I went back, got my diploma, and I never looked back. So yeah, he did. I would listen to Dick for sure. He was a father figure to me.
It's wonderful. But it's interesting that as the part of the film we saw ends with him leaving Chicago in 1963 at the peak of his popularity. It was front page news. It was a really big deal. He went away for 4 years. He worked in Los Angeles. He had a syndicated show out of New York. He was certainly prominent in the business, but he had left Chicago. And then he came back for the first time 4 years later in 1967. But things were different. The world had changed. Our society had changed. And it wasn't a very successful run for him. And I think that's...
Yeah, people were glad to see him back. We loved, we wanted him back, but things had changed so drastically. The disc jockeys had changed. They were now cynical. They were not this little buoyant, happy-go-lucky guy, smile and be happy like Dick. Everything had changed. It got a little darker, and cynicism was in, and Biondi could never be like that. That just wasn't Dick.
And it didn't work.
He was kind of out of favor at that time.
And nothing demonstrated that more than the fact that he was actually literally replaced by Larry Lujak, who was the polar opposite of everything that you think of when you think of Dick Biondi. A great talent, a legendary great talent, but the complete opposite of Dick Biondi. So that first return to Chicago did not end well. It only lasted 4 years. And then it was as if Dick Biondi went into the wilderness for 10 years. We kind of lost track of him. And he literally became the answer to a trivia question, which is, where are they now, when Bob Surratt came calling in 1983. And he did a piece for the local CBS station.
TV show, yeah.
Revealing that Dick had been spending about the last decade on the air in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where he was happy, but it certainly wasn't a career peak. And a combination of the reaction to that special about Dick and some phone calls that I believe you made behind the scenes brought him back a third time. And in 1983, 84, he came back first as a short time as morning guy on WBBM FM. That wasn't a great fit.
Hot new hits.
Hot hits. But a year later, WJMK, Magic 104, the oldie station, starts up with Dick Biondi as its #1 star. And he remained in the market really ever since.
That's right.
What makes you think the third time was the charm?
Well, for one thing, I think Dick, he was a young hothead. He was on his way up. When he was at WLS the first time in the early 60s, he referred to that as his heyday. That was it. Chicago, he absolutely fell in love with Chicago, and we fell in love with him. And I remember when I interviewed Bob Hale, Bob Hale was one of the original jocks from WLS. He told me that he and Dick used to talk years later when they were on the oldies stations. They used to reminisce about the old days, and Dick would say, I miss the fans from those early days. He just had, it was just like a special thing, and he was #1. I mean, and he introduced the Beatles. He did a lot of great things in those few short years. So that was his heyday, and he was on the top. He was king. Well, he was never quite that high again, ever. You can't stay up there, especially after the WCFL debacle with.
But he did have all this residual goodwill from generations of fans, and that's what carried him over the next almost 20 years that he stayed in the market, because he evoked all those good feelings that people had and all those memories, and he was part of it, and he had the credibility to do it as no one else could.
That's right. And we never got tired of hearing his voice on the radio. Let's face it. It just always made us feel really good to hear Dick.
And then finally, ultimately, the move to WLS FM brought him full circle, back to the call letters, back to the building, back to the place where he had his greatest triumphs. And it happened just in time for him to get the career honors he deserved. The 50th anniversary, the marquee of the Chicago Theater, and ultimately a street named in his honor by the city of Chicago for him, all of which happened during his final run at WLS, which was wonderful and well-deserved.
He got that, he was so well-deserved. Yeah. I mean, he's in all the Hall of Fames. He's in the Broadcast Hall of Fame. He has an exhibit in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I should say, and the Illinois Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, of course. And he's just but still, and I hope we can just for a minute touch on him personally, because my experience with him, every time I was with him, he exuded so much humility and so much gratitude. He was the opposite of the kind of megastar you would think someone of his stature would be. That's right.
And what I really found, and I want to ask you about your personal feeling, what I really found about it was, in private, he was always nervous. He was always concerned about being fired. The first thing he would say to me was, "What are you hearing? Am I in trouble? How are the ratings?" I mean, here was one of the biggest broadcasting icons of all time, and the fact that he was always worried every time a program director would call him in for a meeting or just an air check session. He literally thought, "This is the day I'm getting fired." Suppose when you've been fired from a job. Yeah, well, of course, if you've been fired from a job 25 times, I suppose it's understandable for you.
You're kind of expecting it.
Yeah. But on the other hand, it also spoke volumes about his character and his love of doing it, and yet his insecurity about a business that really hadn't always treated him well.
No, I know.
Give me your personal feelings about him and your private conversations. What emerged from those?
Well, Dick, as you say, Dick is a very humble human being, always has been. And I mean, even when he was #1, I mean, I remember the day I met him, he arrived in a helicopter over at Hillside Shopping Center. The kids were going crazy. And I mean, but what did he do? He took the time to talk with every single person that was there and not just say, oh, blah, blah, blah. No, he asked questions about you. He acted like he really wanted to get to know you. And that's why I started a fan club for him, because I said to myself, this guy is really special. Who does this? Nobody's like this, especially somebody of his stature. You would expect him to have a big ego, and he did not have a big ego at all. So, and he was always like that. He was that way with everybody.
Yeah.
So, he endeared himself to people. He was real. He was the real deal.
He was such a public, famous person. He was, and for many of us, he was the first real famous person we knew or we met or we could relate to. I know that was true in your case.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we knew so little about his private life.
Yeah, he was very private.
I wasn't sure until your film that he was married twice. He never talked about either marriage. He didn't talk about his family.
He didn't really want me to talk about anything in the film about his private life, but I had to say something. So, he did. At first he said, he did, as you heard him talking about his first wife. But then later on he told me, he said, I really don't want all my personal life in there. So, but I already had it. So
But what do you make of that? What do you make of the fact that he was so, people really felt like they knew him and he was such a public figure, and yet do you think it was because he wanted the audience to think whatever they wanted, or because he really didn't ever want that curtain pierced?
Well, I think there's a few things there. First of all, radio was his life. There was nothing else that man ever wanted but to be on the radio. Like Bob Eubanks told me, he's television and radio and everything. He told me that Biondi was a radio guy. He said everybody else was some of them were using it as a stepping stone. He used it to get into television. Other people did other things, but not Dick. Dick only wanted to be on the radio. And so when he got fired, it really hurt him. I know he laughed about it, he joked about it, but it bothered him a lot. And he didn't like it. So, but he survived and he kept coming back because that's all he could do. That was his life. And as far as his fans go, his fans were his life too. And he would do anything for his fans. And that's actually why he allowed me to tell his story. John Landecker actually asked me, he said he and Bob Surratt were talking and they said, we've been after Biondi for years to tell his story. So he never would. He said, oh, nobody wants to hear about me and Elvis. And he laughed. I think they do. But he said, so why did he say yes to you? And I said, well, I really think it was because the day I called him, I said, Dick, I've been watching listening to your old shows, and I've been watching, reminiscing about all the fun we had back in the day. And I said, I really want to tell your story from the viewpoint of the fans. And I think that's what it was, the fans, because he would do anything for his fans. So I really think that was it.
Was he ever able to see your finished program?
Yes, he did. And he gave me a quote. And I have that quote on my website. And I went on my Facebook page, actually. I should put it on my website. That's where it needs to go. But if anybody wants to see that quote, I see Scott Childress over there. Hi, Scott. You go on my Facebook page, it's pinned right to the top. Dick Biondi's quote. I'm not going to tell you. Go look it up. It's wonderful. And it's so Dick. So yeah, he saw it. And I wanted him to see it because I wanted to know if I got it right. I said, do I need to change anything? Nope, got it. So I was real happy about that.
That's wonderful. And of course, in June, Dick passed away at 90 years old. He had an amazing run, 67 years as a disc jockey. His career spanned the history of rock and roll in America, and he personified top radio for generations, as I said in my tribute to him when he passed away. And what a lovely gift, document, present you've left for all of us in his honor and in his memory. Thank you for the wonderful work that you did. Sarah, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. We'd love for any of you to ask questions, share your memories, talk about what you liked about the film, talk about what you didn't like about the film, anything you want to say. We'd love to hear from you. So please type your questions in the chat or raise your hand. We'd love to talk with you directly. If no one has anything, I'm sure that Pam and Robert will be able to keep sharing their own memories, but we'd love to hear from you all.
Absolutely. Break in anytime. I agree with you that he really, Dick Biondi, and you just kind of alluded to it. He loved the fans and he loved the artists that he championed. And those were real friendship. Those weren't showbiz friends. The people in your film in the second half, they're even more effusive about what connections he made with them. How many artists, how many hits that are part of the soundtrack of our lives we wouldn't even know about if Dick Biondi hadn't introduced them and championed them and encouraged them. It's hard to think of what radio and rock and roll would be if he hadn't been there.
That's right.
Were you expecting to find that to the extent you did? We knew him as a radio.
I had no idea what I was getting into when I started this film. And I just knew about some of the people that Dick was friends with, of course, you know, the Cornerstone Rock guys, all the guys, you know, the Buckinghams, Jim Peterick and the Ides of March, the New Colony Six, Jimmy Sands. I knew that Ronnie Rice. I knew Dick was friends with all those people. So I knew I had to interview them. But I had no idea. Paul Schaefer from the David Letterman show, he loves Biondi. You know, Frankie Valli. Dick told me to interview Frankie Valli, and Brian Wilson and Al Jardine. I mean, he broke Surfer Girl when he was out in KRLA. That's why I interviewed them. And what a thrill that was. But yeah, I had no idea that Tony Orlando, he adores Dick Biondi. Bobby Rydell, that was my teenage heartthrob.
and these guys were thrilled to speak up for him. Right? It was not a chore. They were enthusiastic to tell you how much they loved the guy.
As soon as they heard about it, oh yeah, you know, no problem. And Ron Onesti, you know, he got me backstage a lot of places where I could get to talk to all these guys, and you know, and they shared all their stories with me, and I get to learn a little bit about this and that, and I learned a lot doing this film. Let me tell you.
And so many of the listeners who loved him also shared their stories with you.
I wanted to include the fans, of course. And there were so many. If you wouldn't believe how many were on the cutting room floor. I mean, even a lot of major stars. I couldn't get everybody in. I mean, it would be like a 2-hour thing, and it was just getting, you know, I had to stop. It's only been 10 years now, so I had to stop sometime. You know.
So we have a question in the chat from Charmaine, who asks if the film goes like further into his career, and it might be a good starting place for just to talk about the rest of the film, its status, how people can find out about, you know, follow along and get to attend future screenings and see the full film.
Yes, it does go into Dick's entire career, as Robert was talking about. It talks about when Dick comes back to WCFL in 67 to 72. And we talked to all of the guys in Chicago, you know, those people that I just mentioned, all the local Chicago rockers, even the band Chicago. The band Chicago, I got to interview Walter Pirazzader from the band Chicago, one of the founders. And he thanked Dick for getting them into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Because Dick really took a stand for them, and they never forgot it, you know. I mean, that's how Dick was. He would stand up for people, and he would give them a chance, and he didn't do it for payola. He never took payola. Didn't believe in it. So he was a friend to everybody. And that's why he's so beloved. But yeah, we go into Dick's career at WCFL, then how he disappeared. He went golfing down at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and ended up he missed being on the air. So he took a job at this little radio station, and the guy that hired him didn't even know who he was. And then he found out. And he was like living off his savings. I mean, he was just doing it for fun. But he had a wonderful career down there. People loved him down in the South. Can you imagine? So anyway, and then Bob Surratt came and did that show, brought him back to Chicago. We go through all of that. So we go through Dick's entire career, how he ended up at WLS-FM, and his 50th anniversary. We have that. We have the street naming ceremony and all of it. So yeah. Anybody else have a question?
And so just to explain to people, this film isn't completely finished yet, right? You are still raising more funds to finish everything, license everything, and finally get to screen it more.
That's where we're at right now. We have the film done. I mean, it's completely done, but all the pictures that are in the film, the archival footage, a lot of that stuff, I just grabbed it off the internet, or somebody sent me a picture and I put it in there because it worked. But I haven't licensed it yet, and I haven't cleared it. So what we're doing now is we're going through all of those images, and I have a young man helping me with this who's done this before. So we're just getting started in the process. It's a huge process. Every single frame of the movie has to be accounted for. The time code, the image, it's a big deal. So, and it's expensive because some of this stuff, I mean, a Getty image can cost $300 and just for a picture. I mean, and the archival footage is expensive. So, I mean, I'm just getting into it now. I mean, I'm going to find out. So that's where we're at. And we're trying to raise money to get that done. We've already raised like $150,000. My budget is around 200. Hopefully it'll be enough as we go through this process. We might find out we might need a little more. We don't know for sure yet, but we really need $50,000 more to get this done. So I'm hoping some angels come and, because they've been showing up all along. So I'm praying for more angels.
What are you hearing at the screenings when you've had them for audiences? What are they reacting to that you find noteworthy?
Well, you feel the love in the room, literally, for Dick. You just do. You feel so good, Scott, you were there the other day over at the golf club. You've been at several of my screenings. What do you think?
I think what happens at these screenings is he is able to promote his goodwill among the people that are there. I know that sounds, a little out there, but when people start to watch it, I don't know if you've noticed that, Pam, but everybody kind of talks beforehand, but after it's over and people are standing around, and it seems like everybody's in a better mood, and I think that's how he always was. He always rubbed off on people like that. I always like to tell the story about, I remember when he was at the Berwyn Car Show, probably 5, 6, 7 years ago or so. And the radio station had the tent set up. And, I know all about that, and going out in the tent and doing the broadcast and passing out T-shirts or passing out whatever. And, you have 1 or 2 people stop by. Here he was on Ogden Avenue in Berwyn with the tent out there, and the line was a block and a half long. And it was just so people could come up and say hello. He wasn't even giving anything away. He was signing his stuff, but you know how he is. He needs to talk to everybody. And that's how he is. He is able to, I don't know how he can do it. He had incredible recall for people's names and people's faces. And there's days I can't even tell you what I did yesterday. So, but that's how he was. And I think that's, like we had discussed in the past, that's what he lived for. Like you said, it wasn't payola. It had nothing to do with fame and fortune, because I asked him several times too about about some of his backstory being in radio. I wanted to know, other than what we all knew, public record. And he would always change the subject on me. Well, tell me about you. What's going on with you? How are you feeling? How are you doing? Is everything going okay? So he would always kind of turn that around. And I think he was able to do that with all the listeners too. It's the same thing, that he genuinely wanted to know how they were doing. And somehow he would catalog all that in his head and would remember that all the way to the very end. I mean, I saw him in one of his last remotes, which was the toy drive over in Bolingbrook, and his recall was still unbelievable.
I know. I think he had a photographic memory, honestly. I do. He could remember things that you just cannot believe, So yeah, he was a remarkable man, honestly. Not only as an icon, but as a human being. He was just an absolute angel, really. Just a sweetheart.
Well, and I think one of the services that you're doing by doing this documentary and bringing this up is that people in the future will not forget, and they'll know who he is. And I had several people that went to screenings, and they weren't really, they knew, oh yeah, that's that guy. He's on the oldie station, or he yells a lot, or whatever. And then they see your story, and they get a whole new meaning of what he is and how he conducted himself in his career, and newfound respect for what he did. Because I think on the surface, a lot of people could look at his delivery, which in the early days was what they did. But as time went on, there were people that would accuse him of his delivery being campy or, out of style. But that's just what he did. And the people that knew him and listened to him all the time saw past that and knew that's who he is. And it's not fake. It's not contrived. That's who he is. And he truly was. Ask Dan Wolf. I mean, he was excited to come into that studio every day.
Yes, he was. I know. What a gift. What a gift to all of us. He was. I just saw somebody ask me, have I tried GoFundMe? Yes, I did. I tried a Kickstarter campaign real early on. I made the mistake, you can choose to do all or nothing. That was a bad move. I didn't quite make it. I had to start all over again. So, yeah, and I did do a GoFundMe, and we finally did raise, I think, $15,000 at that GoFundMe. I should do another one, but it's a lot of work doing all these things. And I'm just right now focusing on getting all the licensing done. And I had somebody come up to me at the golf club the other day. And she's a retired fundraiser, and she offered to help me. So maybe we're going to try some new things too. I'm trying to get some corporate sponsors. It's all tax deductible donations. So anybody wants to be part of it, your name goes up in the film credits. It goes up on our website. It goes out on all of our emails. I mean, we put all our names everywhere, and it's tax deductible. So donations, you can just go on our website, and there's a little donate button there, dickbiondifilm.com, and all of our Facebook and Twitter or X or whatever. All those icons are right there on the homepage as well. Our YouTube channel, you can click everything right from our homepage. So it's kind of the best place to go. There's a lot of information on there too. Our trailer's on there. So yeah, if anybody's interested, come on over.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us tonight. This was such a wonderful conversation. We're so honored to have both of you with us and to see this film. So, and thank you for coming.
This was wonderful, really wonderful. Scott, I'm so glad you came too.
Yes, I lost 2 hours of my life on the tri-state coming back from our stations in Gurnee. So, but I got here just in time.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Congratulations, Pam. Thank you again.
I'm sure you saw him in the film, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, and thank you, Robert. Thank you so much.
Thank you.